Okay, so welcome to our second panel today on transculturality and identity construction in the Black Sea region. We will start with Oleksii Sokyrko's presentation, who has joined us online via Zoom. Welcome, and he will give us a presentation on war as a gastronomic journey. Evliya, Celebi and Yakiv Markovych about the Northern Black Sea region food traditions. So the floor is yours, Oleksii.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Hello, everybody. Okay, let's start. In the pre-modern period of European history, wars were one of the most important instruments of cultural transfer. Peoples of war, soldiers and diplomats gained new experience from acquaintance with foreign cultures, borrowed habits and domestic practices, and themselves became carriers and disseminators of novelties of their own countries. The war quickly spread the two major cultural products closely related to it: military technologies and food practices. And I will start my presentation, just a minute. Okay. From the point of view of such transcultural contacts, the area of the Northern Black Sea, which has been a place of active interaction between the East and the West, particularly interesting. It's also evident that it was not an impenetrable wall between civilizations, but a field of actively interaction and exchange. The anatomy of such cultural contacts during the wars is well evident from the example of two ego sources describing the wars and the life of the Northern Black Sea in the second half of the 17th and the first half of the 18th centuries. There are the diaries of an Ottoman diplomat and intellectual Evliya Celebi and Ukrainian Cossack official and erudite Yakiv Markovych. First of all, there is a short biographical sketch of Yakiv Markovych, which belongs to aristocratical Cossack family related with hetman of Ukraine, Ivan Skoropadsky. He graduated the Kyiv National Academy, had a good education, spoke several European languages, collected a large library. As Cossack officer and politician, Markovych visited the capitals of the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg and Moscow, and also took part in the imperial wars of the first half of the 18th century. During his life, he conducted diary, home protocol in Ukrainian, домашний protocol, or домашняя записка, which had the character of the classic diary with daily records of the events of his life. Evliya Celebi, born in a family of Sultan's court officials, had a good education, carrying out the diplomatic assignments of Sultan Murad I, Grand Vizier Melek Ahmed Pasha, and the Crimean Khans Islam Giray and Mehmed Giray. The result of Celebi's life adventures was the book of travels, Seyhat Nameh, which included 10 chapters with extensive descriptions of historical events in which he had to participate. The time distance between the two texts is about 70 years. However, it's important that both memories visited the same region, Podolia, which played an important role in the transit trade of the Ottoman Empire and the Danube principalities with Central Europe. At the end of the 17th century, these lands were temporarily under Ottoman rule. The long neighborhood of Turks, Tatars, Moldovans, Poles, and Ukrainians created a specific cultural situation here. The campaigns in which both memorists had to take part, they described not only through the prism of war and diplomacy, but also their own life experience. At different times, both memorists visited the same cities. They became a key focus in the description of the region. Kamenets-Podolsky, Mohyliv-Podolsky, Medjibish, Letichev, and Khotin. There is a map of travel map and map of destinations of our heroes, and red points, it's cities which were visited by Celebi and Markovych in different times. Despite the different cultural background and some differences between narrative canons, both memoirs describe the region in a very similar way. Climate, natural resources, urban infrastructure, ethnic and religious composition, crafts and trade, prices, food assortments, agriculture conditions. Celebi, as an Orthodox Muslim, notice, however, more peculiarities in what we see than the Christian Markovych, whom the cultural contrast with homeland seemed minimal. A common denominator and a kind of indicator of satiety and arrangement of the marching life in both memoirs are mentions of good provision of army with provisions and cattle, trophy food, and very significantly the presence in the region where there were good drinking water. A special place in this notice is given to the eating habits of the local population, food and dishes. First of all, the authors noted the assortment of food products in urban markets, prices and quality. Descriptions of strangeness in the culture of food are always compared with a specific native. For example, Celebi always notes the presence of absence of white bread, which is a measure of quality of life, an assortment of fruits and berries that can be very good or conveniently worse than those grows in Turkey. As for grapes, for example, he often says that they are, but due to the cold and damp climate, it's unsuitable for either eating or winemaking. Large of well-groomed gardens always receive a positive response, especially in the year bountiful harvest. Remember that in this period, Ottoman culture, gardening had a high level of development. Markovych was more interested in exotic imported goods, especially Oriental spices and groceries. This interest is strengthened by the fact that the prices in the markets of Podillia were significantly lower than in the Hetmanate. The author also notes with pleasure the variety and low prices for popular in Hetmanate Wallachian wine, Turkish raisins and dried fruits. The authors also describe strange things for them, and at the same time note the familiar dishes and drinks. It's noteworthy that both memoirs don't meet completely exotic or unfamiliar goods and products. Even imported food and beverages. For example, for Celebi, it was horilka, vodka, strong liquors and tinctures, sweet sugar. For Markovych, spices, musk, caviar, citrus and raisins don't cause them cultural excitement. There are quite familiar to them products that just have a lower price and better quality and this point of travel, but no more. Another very important point that seems to be read between the lines in both memoirs is the lack of sharp cultural contrast in food practices. It's possible that the absence of foreign in the perception of local cuisine by both authors was the result a close synthesis of Oriental and European traditions in economics and nutrition. Celebi, as a Muslim, once his passing mentions the unworthy habit of the Cossacks to eat pork, but he directs much more criticism to the Crimean Tatars and Nogais, whom he criticized for the barbaric custom of eating raw meat. Celebi tends to explain the ambiguity in the style of chanting the infidels not by religion, but by climate and natural conditions. In Markovych's descriptions, we don't see any fixation of any cultural distance in food, because the cuisine of Podillia was quite close to the gastronomic culture of the Hetmanate, where differences could be caused only by differences in food resources. The reason for this was purely cultural factors, because the culinary traditions of the right and left bank Ukraine, in addition to their authenticity, were densely saturated with influences of borrowings from the Ottoman and Crimean Tatars cultures. So food thus becomes for the authors a cultural measure of the community and difference or of native or strange culture, and the war becomes a cognitive cultural journey. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to being so on point with the time, Oleksii. I'll just start with a few points and then questions to both presenters. Thank you. So despite their similarities, I would claim that these two papers fit seamlessly within the remits of this conference. In both cases, two regions in question, Podillia or Eastern Carpathians or Carpathian Rus, and by extension Ukraine's history as a whole cannot be studied within one national history or historiography, one corpus of sources. Hence, as Martin pointed out, we need to employ the transregional cultural national methodologies and look at different histories at the same time. As shown by the presenters, we have a particular region with its people and regional peculiarities as seen or imagined from outside, either by political actors, diplomats, or knowledge producers. Both papers offer a novel approach to the study of regions. Martin looks at the production and transfer of knowledge. Oleksii exchange in food practices. In both papers, it is the exchange that stays in the focus. The exchange usually takes place between the great powers, usually states or those acting on their behalf, those actors with agency. But what is going on the ground? And I felt that this kind of the situation on the ground was kind of missing in both papers, although it might not be your point of inquiry. So I kind of to what I got out of these papers, it seems that in the case of Podillia, we have a mixture of cultures as presented in the variety of gastronomic goods, and perhaps I would assume also languages, maybe not spoken, but understood. As for Eastern Carpathians, the variety of political options define a new understanding of self, the application and acceptance of externally created developed categories. The view of this region poses similar challenges. How does our perception of the region and its people change depending on the lens and the observation point? I really liked your map, and you show that we have all these different centers. We have like Ukrainian cities, we have Prague, we have Vienna, we have Budapest. So how our perception of the region changes if we look from the perspective of say Budapest, and then we turn back to Lviv, or in the case of Podillia, when we turn from the Cossack state
to the Ottoman Empire. Martin also poses an important question of the periphery and center, at least in your paper. You didn't talk about this kind of the methodology in your presentation, but what is the potential of peripheries? And I think this is a very important point to understand. What can we learn of the center if we shift our focus to the peripheries? In case of Oleksii, what do we learn about the Ottoman Empire or the Cossack state if we look at the Podillia, at the interaction between these two centers of power and the periphery itself? And of course, in the case of your paper, it's like, what do we learn about all those different centers of power if we look at the region of Eastern Carpathians? In the case of Podillia, we have a region that under the Ottoman rule, but it is so much closer, at least culturally, to the Cossack state. In the case of Lemko, Boyko, and Hutsul regions, political centers are elsewhere, plus they always change, while cultural proximity defines the option and self-identification. Both studies more or less make use of ego documents. The problem is, for me at least, how do we read ego documents and whether it is necessary to set them against official state-produced documents? And if so, where would our reference point be? Martin has demonstrated how varied the views of the competing governments on the region were and how those strategies changed in the view of constant shifts of the border. Maybe this is also more kind of becomes obvious from your paper, the submitted paper, because you show in the paper how different governments take interest in those local identities when they can benefit like to shift the border or get some land by kind of endorsing those identities. Another important question is the correlation between self-identification and the official perspective on the region. Did Yakiv Markovych saw Podillia as Ukraine, part of the Cossack state due to its cultural similarities? What was the view of the region by Evliya Celebi? Was it just a territory ceded annexed? How integrated this area was in his or the Ottoman imagination? In a similar way, how similar did the ethnic groups in Eastern Carpathia feel themselves despite the political divisions? So these were like some points that I kind of thought that were similar. And then I have specific questions to Oleksii. I'll start with Oleksii and then Martin. So to Oleksii, it was particularly interesting for me to read that Yakiv Markovych did not find any of the foreign foods exotic. And obviously, kind of the conclusion can be that Cossack nobility was no less educated, cultured, or civilized as the Ottoman imperial officials. My question is, what can we learn about Ukraine's history if we follow those unorthodox lines of inquiry and study it through the perspective of different influences and borrowings, especially in terms of food tradition? The second question, they are all perhaps related. What can we learn about Ukraine in the 17th, 18th century if we extend the pool of available sources to those originated in the Ottoman Empire? How different it would be from the one inspired by the imperial Soviet Russian historiography, or what the image of Cossack nobility would be if we kind of extend the pool of sources to other perhaps like national historiographies and sources available there. And this is perhaps a little bit provocative. Why do you think there is so little awareness also in Ukrainian understanding of the Cossacks as educated, cultured, civilized, and so on? Why do we see them as bandits mainly, or we don't see them as nobility on a par with other countries?
Thank you very much for the very interesting comments. And I have 2 points. First point, I emphasize the synthesis of different cultures created a unique situation where the both authors, both heroes, didn't feel a sharp cultural boundary in everyday life and food tradition. The first point is, in the case of Markovych, it's an educated man who belonged to Cossack aristocracy. Rather interesting that both our memories belonged to the cultural elites of the countries. Of course, this is not a view of ordinary people. The assessment of the culture situation is very unique. He described this everyday life and food situation, nutrition situation, from the point of view of very intellectual and educated man. This is very serious speciality of these two sources, of these two diaries, and thank you. That's all.
Okay, so Olena, thank you for your contribution. And then I would open the floor for our participants. First, you know the procedure. You here at the live audience, and then we will move to the Zoom participants. Oleksii?
Yeah, so I have two questions to both speakers. So first is for Oleksii. So usually when historians discuss any question with this Cossack lands or Cossack state, so it's very hard to overcome methodological nationalism, because we usually have this frame of Ukraine or pre-modern Ukraine. And about your research, I was seeing about this food and the gastronomic traditions. I was thinking that it's a great way to challenge this Ukrainian kind of scientific nationalistic perception, because you are showing the great cases of connection, cultural and other connections with Ottoman Empire, with other states around. So how do you see connection between such studies when you trace these hybrids, these cultural connections, with dominantal understanding of Cossack state as something pre-Ukrainian or as a strong part of Ukrainian historical tradition?
Thank you very much for your questions. It's very interesting, and I start with the last question. You see, in the case of food studies, we can talk about compiling some tradition that has become to the visit card of Ukrainian lifestyle and Ukrainian food culture in modern period. This period, which was presented in my report, it was some starting of this future modern tradition, which will evolve in 19th century, of course. And of course, the Cossack state, the Cossack Hetmanate and his culture, his social structure, his lifestyle, it was only a part of future Ukrainian modern culture. But in this period, and particularly in Markovych diary, we found some interesting features which become very characteristic and very special for Ukrainian food tradition. For example, borscht, salo, horilka, and so many other dishes and food products, which in 19th century, in Ukrainian ethnographical and Ukrainian national tradition were so very important things which market some special Ukrainian features in lifestyle. Thank you.